there's the option for me to have a message for returning subscribers. And I thought I would craft a message especially for returning subscribers. The questions I Hello and concurrent viewer. While discussing sociology with Diana earlier, I was reminded of Durkheim, the sociologist, the French sociologist, the Jewish French sociologist. This is something that I thought would be doubly interesting, and I've got a page of what he said on anomie. And now I'm looking at his Wikipedia entry, which I thought would be helpful if I went through with you, because then I'll read out what it was said and share what I learn with you. So in the chat I will post the link to Emile Durkheim on anomie, and he's basically saying that we need religion. And he was Jewish, but a secular Jew. He died in 1917 and was born in 1858. And is considered one of the principal architects of modern social science alongside Max Weber and Karl Marx. So his work was concerned how societies can maintain their integrity and coherence in modernity, an era in which traditional social and religious ties are much less universal and in which new social institutions have come into being. Durkheim's conception of the scientific study of society laid the groundwork for modern sociology, and he used such scientific tools as statistics, surveys, and historical observation in his analysis of suicides in Catholic and Protestant groups. His first major sociological work was De la division de travail social. I'm sorry about my French pronunciation, it's not my native tongue. Which means, there's an English. The division of labour in society, followed in 1895 by the rules of sociological method, and I'm not going to try and pronounce that in French. The same year in which Durkheim set up the first European Department of Sociology and became France's first Professor of Sociology. So that's interesting. So he studied the different suicide rates of Catholic and Protestant populations. And he wanted to distinguish social science from psychology and political philosophy. And he established a journal called The Elementary Forms of the Religious Life. He presented a theory of religion, comparing the social and cultural lives of Aboriginal and modern societies. How very interesting. Durkheim was deeply preoccupied with the acceptance of sociology as a legitimate science. He refined the positivism originally set forth by Auguste Comte, promoting what could be considered as a form of epistemological realism, as well as the use of the hypothetico-deductive model in social science. I'm afraid I don't know what either of them are, For Durkheim, sociology was a science of institutions, understanding the term in its broader meaning as the beliefs and modes of behaviour instituted by the collectivity, with its aim being to discover structural social facts. As such, Durkheim was a major proponent of structural functionalism, a foundational perspective in both sociology and anthropology. In his view, social science should be purely holistic, in the sense that sociology should study phenomena attributed to society at large, rather than being limited to the study of specific actions of individuals. Hey, that's what I'm doing. That's what I've been doing. Aren't I clever? He remained a dominant force in French intellectual life until his death in 1917, presenting numerous lectures and published works on a variety of topics, including the sociology of knowledge, morality, social stratification, religion, law, education, and deviance. Some terms that he coined, such as collective consciousness, are not now also used by lay people. A very clever Jew. So he came from a long line of devout French Jews. His father, grandfather, and great-grandfather had all been rabbis. And young Durkheim began his education in a rabbinical school. But at an early age, he switched schools, deciding not to follow his family's footsteps. In fact, Durkheim led a completely secular life, whereby much of his work was dedicated to demonstrating that religious phenomena stemmed from social rather than divine factors. Despite this fact, Durkheim did not sever ties with his family or with the Jewish community. Actually, many of his most prominent collaborators and students were Jewish, some even blood-related. Well, that is an interesting development of the nature-nurture debate. It was in Leipzig that he learned to appreciate the value of empiricism and its language of concrete, complex things, in sharp contrast to the more abstract, clear and simple ideas of the Cartesian Method. This makes me think of Daniel Sienkiewicz, who isn't even a contact now on Hangouts because he's so angry with me. Now, let's have a look at Cartesian Method. So, Descartes was a rationalist, and I would say rationalists would use deductive reasoning, because empiricism is inductive reasoning. Which is, I think, based on hypotheses. Yeah, deductive reasoning, it's mentioned. Good, it's nice to know that I'm right about these things. Okay, back to Durkheim. So, for methodology, he wrote the rules of sociological method. and he wanted sociology to be scientific. One of the questions raised concerns the objectivity of the sociologist. How may one study an object that, from the very beginning, conditions and relates to the observer? According to Durkheim, observation must be as impartial and impersonal as possible, even though a perfectly objective observation in this sense may never be attained. A social fact must always be studied according to its relation with other social facts, never according to the individual who studies it. Sociology should therefore privilege comparison rather than the study of singular independent facts. Durkheim sought to create one of the first rigorous scientific approaches to social phenomena. Along with Herbert Spencer, he was one of the first people to explain the existence and quality of different parts of a society by reference to what function they served in maintaining the quotidian, i.e. by how they make society work. He also agreed with Spencer's organic analogy, comparing society to a living organism. Thus, his work is sometimes seen as a precursor to functionalism. Functionalism, I think, is utilitarianism. Functionalism is a framework for building theory that sees society as a complex system whose parts work together to promote solidarity and stability. Durkheim also insisted that society was more than the sum of its parts. And social facts. What is a social fact? In sociology, social facts are values, cultural norms, and social structures that transcend the individual and can exercise social control. The French sociologist Durkheim argued that the discipline of sociology should be understood as the empirical study of social facts. For Durkheim, social facts consist of manners and acting, thinking and feeling external to the individual, which are invested with a coercive power by virtue of which they exercise control over him. So that's psychology. I think it's beliefs. A social fact is any way of acting, whether fixed or not, capable of exerting over the individual an external constraint, or which is general over the whole of a given society while having an existence of its own, independent of its individual manifestations. He viewed it as a concrete idea that affected a person's everyday life. Now, I haven't quite got to an example of this social fact. He viewed it as a concrete idea that affected a person's everyday life. Durkheim's examples of social facts included social institutions such as kinship and marriage, currency, language, religion, political organisation, and all societal institutions we must account for in everyday interactions with other members of our societies. Deviating from the norms of such institutions makes the individual unacceptable or misfit in the group. Taboos are a social fact. Among the most noted of Durkheim's work was its discovery of the social fact of suicide rates. By carefully examining police and suicide statistics in different districts, Durkheim demonstrated that the suicide rate of Catholic communities is lower than that of Protestant communities. He ascribed this to a social as opposed to individual cause. This was considered groundbreaking and remains influential. Durkheim's discovery of social facts was significant because it promised to make it possible to study the behaviour of entire societies rather than just of particular individuals. Durkheim points to individual actions as instances of or representations of different types of actions in society. So obviously Catholics have more of an inhibition against suicide than Protestants. Right. Okay, the quite a few headings which I've skipped, but I'm going to go straight to religion because you know it's my area of interest. So he wrote a paper called The Elementary Forms of the Religious Life. To identify the social origin and function of religion, as he felt that religion was a source of camaraderie and solidarity. His second purpose was to identify links between certain groups in different cultures, finding a common denominator. He wanted to understand the empirical social aspect of religion that is common to all religions and goes beyond the concepts of spirituality and God. Durkheim defined religion as a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things, i.e. things set apart and forbidden, beliefs and practices which unite in one single moral community called a church, all those who adhere to them. Very good. So implicit in this definition is the idea of taboo. In this definition, Durkheim avoids references to the supernatural or God. There's quite a few grammatical mistakes in this entry. Durkheim argued that the concept of supernatural is relatively new, tied to the development of science and separation of supernatural, that which cannot be rationally explained, from which can. Thus, according to Durkheim, for early humans everything was supernatural. Similarly, he points out that religions that give little importance to the concept of God exist, such as Buddhism, where the Four Noble Truths are much more important than any individual deity. With that, Durkheim argues, we are left with the following three concepts. The sacred ideas and sentiments kindled by the spectacle of society and which inspire awe, spiritual devotion or respect. The beliefs and practices creating an emotional state of collective effervescence, investing symbols with sacred importance. The moral community, a group of people sharing a common moral philosophy. Out of those three concepts, Durkheim focused on the sacred, noting that it is the very core of a religion. That they are only collective forces hypostasized, that is to say, moral forces. They are made up of the ideas and sentiments awakened in us by the spectacle of society, and not of sensations coming from the physical world. I'm not sure I understand this. Hypostasized is a new word for me. Hypostasis is the underlying state or underlying substance and is the fundamental reality that supports all else. I'm not really clear about that. Got to click on that entry. Okay, let's give an example using the Trinity. In Christian theology, the Holy Trinity consists of three hypostases: hypostasis of the Father, hypostasis of the Son, hypostasis of the Holy Spirit. In Neoplatonism, the hypostasis of the soul, the intellect, and the One was addressed by Plotinus. Oh, I don't know. Okay, it might be a bit unnecessarily complicated. Durkheim saw religion as the most fundamental social institution of humankind, and one that gave rise to other social forms. It was the religion that gave humanity the strongest sense of collective consciousness. Durkheim saw the religion as a force that emerged in the early hunter and gatherer societies, as the emotions, collective effervescence ran high in the growing groups, forcing them to act in new ways and giving them a sense of some hidden force driving them. Over time, as emotions became symbolized and interactions ritualized, religion became more organized, giving a rise to the division between the sacred and the profane. However, Durkheim also believed that religion was becoming less important as it was being gradually superseded by science and the cult of an individual. Thus there is something eternal in religion which is destined to survive all the particular symbols in which religious thought has successfully enveloped itself. However, even if the religion was losing its importance for Durkheim, it still laid the foundation of modern society and the interactions that governed it. And despite the advent of alternative forces, Durkheim argued that no replacement for the force of religion had yet been created. He expresses doubt about modernity, seeing the modern times as a period of transition and moral mediocrity. Durkheim also argued that our primary categories for understanding the world have their origins in religion. It is religion, Durkheim writes, that gave rise to most, if not all, other social constructs, including the larger society. Durkheim argued that categories are produced by the society and thus are collective creations. Thus, as people create societies, they also create categories, but at the same time, they do so unconsciously, and the categories are prior to any individual experience. In this way, Durkheim attempted to bridge the divide between seeing categories as constructed out of human experience and as logically prior to that experience. Our understanding of the world is shaped by social facts. For example, the notion of time is defined by being measured through a calendar, which in turn was created to allow us to keep track of our social gatherings and rituals. Those in turn, on their most basic level, originated from religion. In the end, even the most logical and rational pursuit of science can trace its origins to religion. Durkheim states that religion gave birth to all that is essential in the society. In his work, Durkheim focused on totemism, the religion of the Aboriginal Australians and Native Americans. Durkheim saw this religion as the most ancient religion and focused on it as he believed its simplicity would ease the discussion of the essential elements of religion. As such, he wrote, Now the totem is the flag of the clan. It is therefore natural that the impressions aroused by the clan in individual minds, impressions of dependence and of increased vitality, should fix themselves to the idea of the totem rather than that of the clan, for the clan is too complex a reality to be represented clearly in all its complex unity by such rudimentary intelligences. So I suppose the totem pole is a kind of a coat of arms. That was what I was struggling for. Durkheim's work on religion was criticised on both empirical and theoretical grounds by specialists in the field. The most important critique came from Durkheim's contemporary Arnold van Gennep, an expert on religion and ritual and also on Australian belief systems. Van Gennep argued that Durkheim's view of primitive peoples and simple societies was entirely erroneous. Van Gennep further argued that Durkheim demonstrated a lack of critical stance towards his sources, collected by traders and priests, naively accepting their veracity, and that Durkheim interpreted freely from dubious data. At the conceptual level, Van Gennep pointed out Durkheim's tendency to press ethnography into a prefabricated theoretical scheme. Well, he doesn't say why Durkheim's wrong. Despite such critiques, Durkheim's work on religion has been widely praised for its theoretical insight and whose arguments and propositions, according to Robert Allen Jones, have stimulated the interest and excitement of several generations of sociologists, irrespective of theoretical school or field of specialization. Sociology of knowledge. And then I've got collective representations, work on morality, and that's it. Not much longer. Right. Sociology of knowledge. While Durkheim's work deals with a number of subjects, including suicide, the family, social structures, and social institutions, a large part of his work deals with the sociology of knowledge. While publishing short articles on the subject earlier in his career, Durkheim's definitive statement concerning the sociology of knowledge comes in his 1912 magnum opus, The Elementary Forms of Religious Life. This book has as its goal not only the elucidation of the social origins and function of religion, but also the social origins and impact of society on language and logical thought. Durkheim worked largely out of a Kantian framework and sought to understand how the concepts and categories of logical thought could arise out of social life. He argued, for example, that the categories of space and time were not a priori. Rather, the category of space depends on a society's social grouping and geographical use of space, and a group social rhythm that determines our understanding of time. In this, Durkheim sought to combine elements of rationalism and empiricism, arguing that certain aspects of logical thought common to all humans did exist, but that they were products of collective life, thus contradicting the tabula rasa empiricist understanding whereby categories are acquired by individual experience alone, and that they were not universal a prioris, as Kant argued, since the content of the categories differed from society to society. Well, that's a bit complicated and I'm not going to try to explain it. Collective representations. Another key element to Durkheim's theory of knowledge, outlined in elementary forms, is the concept of collective representations. Collective representations are the symbols and images that come to represent the ideas, beliefs, and values elaborated by a collectivity and are not reducible to individual constituents. They can include words, slogans, ideas, or in any number of material items that can serve as a symbol, such as a cross, a rock, a temple, a feather, etc. As Durkheim elaborates, collective representations are created through intense social interaction and are products of collective activity. As such, these representations have the particular and somewhat contradictory aspect that they exist externally to the individual, since they are created and controlled not by the individual but by society as a whole, yet simultaneously within each individual of the society by virtue of that individual's participation within society. So how about giving us an example? Arguably, the most important collective representation is language, which according to Durkheim is a product of collective action. And because language is a collective action, language contains within it a history of accumulated knowledge and experience that no individual would be capable of creating on their own. If concepts were only general ideas, they would not enrich knowledge a great deal, for, as we have already pointed out, the general contain nothing more than the particular. But if before all else they are collective representations, they add to that which we can learn by our own personal experience all that wisdom and science which the group has accumulated in the course of centuries. Thinking by concepts is not merely seeing reality on its most general side, but it is projecting a light upon the sensation which illuminates it and penetrates it and transforms it. As such, language as a social product literally structures and shapes our experience of reality. This discursive approach to language and society was developed later by French philosophers such as Michel Foucault, about what words mean. And the final paragraph is morality. Durkheim defines morality as a system of rules for conduct, very similar to mine. His analysis of morality is strongly marked by Immanuel Kant and his notion of duty. While Durkheim was influenced by Kant, he was highly critical of aspects of the latter's moral theory and developed his own positions. Durkheim argues that with Kant, Durkheim agrees with Kant that within morality there is an element of obligation, a moral authority which, by manifesting itself in certain precepts particularly important to it, confers upon moral rules an obligatory character. Morality tells us how to act from a position of superiority. There exists a certain pre-established moral norm to which we must conform. It is through this view that Durkheim makes a first critique of Kant in saying that moral duties originate in society and are not to be found in some universal concept, such as the categorical imperative. Durkheim also argues that morality is characterized not just by this obligation, but is also something that is desired by the individual. The individual believes that by adhering to morality they are serving the common good, and for this reason the individual submits voluntarily to the moral commandment. However, in order to accomplish its aims, morality must be legitimate in the eyes of those whom it speaks. As Durkheim argues, this moral authority is primarily to be located in religion, which is why any religion one finds a code of morality. For Durkheim, it is only society that has the resources, the respect and the power to cultivate within an individual both the obligatory and the desirous aspects of morality. Well, that was useful for me anyway. Oh, it says 2 concurrent viewers. Hello. Hello, Tiffany. Thank you for saying it's interesting. But I urge you all to read the link I gave you of the Durkheim on anomie, which is us, basically. It's us, and he wrote it. Well, he died in 1917, so we can look upon what is happening to us now as a process that occurred a long time ago. And basically, Durkheim is saying that it's religion that gives us our identity, and it gives us rules of behaviour and how we are to treat each other. And if we don't follow them, then we're just going to feel bad, and bad things will happen to our group. And so it's obvious, isn't it, really, what we must do. And what Durkheim had noticed in France was the fact that they didn't really have any rules in France, because you just don't, if you don't have a religion, and liberalism is just not up to the job, right? It doesn't have a handbook, and all all religions worth their salt would have a handbook, scripture. And because liberalism doesn't even claim to come from God, you just get a whole bunch of people who say, well, I wrote a book about liberalism, and people cannot agree on which one is the best. So that's really the benefit of scripture. It has supreme authority, and even if we don't quite believe in God, we will still have to acknowledge that this scripture has divine authority. And this is how we kind of reach out to God or to heaven, by imagining a better world, even if it's only hypothetical. And this we might call our ideals as we reach out to it, when we can imagine a better world, a best case scenario, when even as we talk about things in an ideal world that we do not at the moment inhabit. So very interesting ideas. I do hope you'll have a look at this link I gave you about what he said about anomie, which is when people no longer have a religion, and they no longer feel they have to act in the best interests of their society because there are no rules. And so I think what Durkheim says is that, well, we need a religion. And he said it as long ago as 1917, that he needs it. France needed a religion, and that would include, well, any society that doesn't have one. And of course, things didn't collapse immediately, but we're getting to the tail end of this disease of not having a religion that you can take seriously, whose rules you can agree on. This is really the fundamental aspect of the breakdown of the moral order, when we don't even know what the rules are, or what, A, you don't know what the rules are because they keep changing so quickly, and B, you don't know what moral system the rules are based on, and then you don't even know that you need a moral system. And I think we are at the third stage, because I can't get anybody to agree with me that we need a moral system, or what a moral system is, because people are just going to quarrel with me about, what it is and what it's for. And I'm saying, yeah, a moral system includes religion or a secular political ideology. And the problem with a secular political ideology is that people are just going to say, well, who is Marx to tell us what to do? He's dead now, isn't he? So, well, recently I was arguing with a Jew, and I asked him a question, and he said, oh, this late rabbi said that. And I said, well, he's dead now. And he got really annoyed at me because he thought I was being disrespectful, and why was him being dead? Why did this rabbi being dead have anything to do with my attitude? And I'm saying, you can find all kinds of people who are either dead or mad to have said something. And what I wanted to know was, was there anyone living prepared to affirm what he said, to carry on, the tradition of this rabbi? And he wasn't sure, which is why he got so, angry and annoyed. And this is fundamentally the reason for why we need a religion that isn't just a secular political ideology, because they all break down, because people will say, well, Marx is dead, Hitler's dead, Mussolini is dead, and whoever cooked up Scientology is dead. But if we hypothesize that these laws come from an immortal and eternal and divine, omnipotent, omniscient, and perfectly moral being, then we would feel a bit better about following those rules. Because fundamentally what people don't like doing is feeling foolish. So when the person who was supposed to be following is dead, you think, well, maybe he was wrong. So that's why the Abrahamic God is important, because we need to hypothesize that the most powerful being conceivable gave us these rules, and will know if we break them, and will punish us or reward us, depending on whether we obey or disobey. And whether we really believe it or not is fundamentally unimportant if we can see that there are that these laws discourage particular evils that we wish discouraged, such as murder, theft, sexual immorality, income inequality, environmental degradation, all those things. And I'm saying, if you read the Quran, you'll see that all these things have been dealt with. It is saying, you want a peaceful society, then you'll have to follow these rules, and your reward is something closer to heaven on earth if you follow those rules. And it seems a fair enough bargain to me, and we know it's capable of being achieved, because what Westerners are mostly doing when they talk about when they bemoan the present is that they know that there was a better time enjoyed by their parents or grandparents, i.e. the 1950s, when the West was white and everything was so much better, when God was in his heaven, right? Midnight Rider pops up and tells us that he didn't know what covet meant. Okay, I think I've said enough, haven't I? Don't forget to read Emile Durkheim on anomie.